What's up, Escaping Fragility? Calling in for another video. So I've been thinking a lot about change lately and failure and our desire to avoid making mistakes. What's interesting though, if you, as most big ideas are, as most fundamental ideas are, we overlook them because they seem too simple. But the only way you can have a successful life is because you're growing and adapting and learning and iterating, right? The only way to do any of that is by making mistakes, by throwing out tests and getting feedback about what works and what doesn't, right? You can't be a scientist. You can't learn anything if you don't try things that don't work, if you don't actually figure out what doesn't work. In fact, true, real science are only things that can be falsified. You can prove them wrong. Therefore, you know how to prove them right. And if you can't prove something wrong, which a lot of social science and a lot of what politicians take and, macroeconomics talk about are basically ideas and concepts and theories that you cannot prove because you cannot experiment and prove causation or the opposite of causation, right? For the individual to grow, you absolutely have to experiment and figure things out, right? Now, most of us do this on accident because we just do shit. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Maybe we're being aware. Maybe we're just kind of subconsciously learning things, or we're letting fear drive us, or subconscious, or our ego, or our bias, or this or that. And as you see, most people kind of like water that reaches this level. They're kind of defaulting to what their status quo average regression to the mean is. And that's how most people do it. And that's why you see the same trajectory. Most people peak at certain times and then they get a profession. And then as they get older, 30s, 40s, whatever, they kind of stay in the same place and then they eventually start declining, right? But there are outliers that are learning shit, building shit, inventing shit, creating shit, getting better, stronger, healthier, more knowledgeable into their 50s, their 60s, their 70s, literally to the day they die. These people, for whatever reason, have figured out how to embrace failure, embrace change, and actually seek it out. Because either on purpose or an accident, they figured out that is how you grow. You go do stuff. You do more of the things that work, less of the things or none of the things that don't. And that's how you evolve. That's how you grow. That's how you build a successful life. And this applies not just to success. This is happiness too. This is happiness, fulfillment, finding things that matter to you. How do you want to spend your time? If you're not trying things and experimenting and getting that feedback loop nice and tight while paying attention to that feedback loop, paying attention to how you feel about things, how are you going to build a life that is right for yourself? How? You can't. It's impossible. Instead, most people default to what society says, or what their parents say, or whatever, what is acceptable. And so they stay in relationships they're not fulfilled in. They stay in jobs they're not fulfilled in. They stay doing the same things or the same level of help for this or that. So here's a quote. All systems insulated from feedback from free markets or natural forces eventually get corrupted. Now think about orthodoxy. Anything that is the way it is, because that's just the way it is. Any status quo. Is that getting feedback from natural forces, i.e. you, your body, your biology, your psychology? Most of the time, it's not, because what you're probably doing, what most people do, is they have this status quo, these rules, this box, and then they actually try to force themselves into that box. And when they invariably bang into the walls and whatever, they just put themselves back in that box, or they lie, they cheat, they steal, or they do these things, bad behaviors, all as a inability to either accept that box is different or really truly accept and internalize that box, right? And in one way or the other, it creates this internal angst that leads to a lot of unhappiness and bad behavior and just suffering. Most of, I don't know if most is the word. Your truest, highest self-actualized self, most of the time, I think I can say this safely for most people most of the time, is not going to fit perfectly into society's box, or your parents' box, or your partner's box, or you're this, or you're that. And even if 50% of your life or 80% or 60 or whatever it is for you fits into that box of society that says it's okay or is right or whatever, what are you going to do with those other percentage points? The 50%, the 40, 30, whatever? Like, are you just going to pretend? Are you just going to ignore those? It's actually very sad that life is so amazing, so abundant, and can literally be the most amazing thing, the most amazing gift. It is the most amazing gift, actually. But most of us literally don't even consider that, or we take it for granted, or we get sucked up into nonsense. But it's amazing and sad that, as Thoreau said, most men, and this is most people, live lives of quiet desperation. It's because they're continually trying to fit themselves into what society says is right, or their parents say, or whatever. And they're not seeking their highest self and their best and most fulfilled life. It's sad. It's really sad. I'll be talking about this a lot more on the channel. This idea and the rabbit holes and the different ideas to go into are very, they're many. They're deep, they're dark, but I honestly don't see how there's any other choice. Like, if you actually care about evolving your life and becoming better, you don't have a choice. That's kind of the reality of the situation.